My name is Misty Flores, and I'm the assistant curator for the Rienzi collection. And today is the first in a series of virtual gallery talks where we'll be highlighting different aspects of our collection. Today, our focus is on the Mexican room, where I'll be looking at Chinese export porcelain for Mexico, with a particular focus on the porcelain that was commissioned by municipal and city institutions to commemorate the accession of Charles IV of Spain. The Spanish Empire was one of the largest empires in history. From the 15th to the 19th century, it covered a vast swath of territories from Mexico, the southwestern and central part of the United States, Florida, and the Philippines. Less than a decade after the Spanish conquistador, Hernán Cortés and his army overtook the Aztecs at the city of Tenochtitlan in 1521, a viceroyalty of New Spain was established. So that way they could kind of control all of the goods coming in and out from that part of the world. Explorations of transatlantic trade from the Americas to Asia took place quickly after the viceroyalty was settled in 1521, after Ferdinand Magellan circumnavigated the world. The decision to open these new international trading sites were motivated by a number of factors. Primarily, the Spanish were looking for more sources of silver in order to support their economy, which was in danger of coming to a grinding halt, as well as their competition with Portugal for commerce, Christianization, and political control of the Far East, first in Japan and then in China. Several treaties in the 16th century between Spain and Portugal basically divided up the world, with Spain being awarded the Philippine Islands, which would be their base of operations for Asia. The city of Manila was established in 1570, and trans-Pacific trade officially began in 1571. Silver from the mines in Spanish America would be sent across the Pacific Ocean to the Philippines and then used to support the colony there, as well as buy Asian exotic wares that were in demand and sent to the New Spain markets. This trans-Pacific trade was particularly important because for the first time it provided the Americas with a direct link to Asia. Manila would eventually funnel goods into Mexico from all over the world. The market, it's seen in this image here, attracted merchants from Mexico and China to trade. The trade that connected China and Spain, New Spain, was known as the Manila galleon trade and would remain the active trade route for over 250 years. The trade route was an economically powerful system of linking Spain and the commodities of Asia via Mexico. It consisted of two separate routes, one heading westward from Acapulco to Manila, and eastward on the return following two separate belts of trade winds across the Pacific. The various goods, textiles, spices, and porcelains were shipped to Acapulco, where they were dispersed at an annual fair. Demand was so great for these wares that the ships were sometimes overladen with goods, causing them to sink. Trade between Manila and Acapulco is quite unique because even though both ports fell under the rule of the Spanish crown, a lot of times the crown itself was left out of the exchange. They could not regulate the trade between the ships because they went directly from port to port, and a huge amount of silver was sent over to Asia against the wishes and interests of merchants in Spain. In the 17th century, the Manila galleons carried an estimated 2 million pesos to Asia annually. Although the exploration of a route to Asia was driven by Spain's desire to have access to Asia, it wasn't necessarily the only reason. The making and development of this trade network was not solely based on imperial ambitions of the Spanish crown. It was based on the quality of Asian goods, as well as the demands of consumers in colonial Spanish America. The role of Spanish America in the larger story of trade tends to really focus on silver as the main driving force as to what was going on, and the focus being really on European habits of consumption. While silver extracted from the mines was crucial to the story of modern exchange, the wealth that the silver produced from these mines fueled diverse and vibrant habits of consumption in New Spain. And because of the Manila-Mexico direct trade route, it also meant that a lot of times people in the Spanish colonies had access to Asian goods in greater quantities earlier than most of Europe. The urban centers of viceregal New Spain became sites of extravagant and display and consumption, and trade networks brought in an impressive array of goods into the city. This painting by Cristobal del Villalpando's painting of Mexico City's main square, done at the turn of the 18th century, really reflects the vibrant, dynamic energy of the city. Mexico at the turn of the century was the main focus and the jewel of the Spanish crown in terms of goods that were kind of going through back and forth. The volcanic mountains are set in the back, with the Cathedral of Mexico City placed to the left of the image, and the Palace of the Viceroyalty is situated in the back of the painting, part of it which was destroyed by riots in 1692. The walled Perron, named after Manila's commercial center, features prominently within the center of the image. Men and women are seen browsing throughout. Also, you can see men in carriages, women and children, all around the city center. The Perron is important because it was basically the place where imported goods passed through, and people of the city could do their shopping and see what latest wares were on offer. So the walled center of it features the Perron, which the imported goods were sold. The outside, further towards the back, it features tented areas in which indigenous women would sell their goods as well. Everyone was always on hunt for a bargain. So this really kind of displays a dynamic energy that was involved in the purchasing of these goods. What's really interesting is that this image symbolizes not just the importation of goods, but peoples as well. Because if you think about where Mexico City sat in the whole chain of trade, you'd have people passing through from all over Europe, all over the Americas. You'd have Spanish officials, you'd have army, you'd have soldiers from Flanders and Italy, you'd have friars, you'd have indentured servants and slaves that were all passing through on their way through to the Philippines or China. What's interesting is that these movements of people and commodities that along these routes that connected to the larger world really reflected what people in this particular area saw in terms of their importance and their contribution to the larger story of trade. Once these trade routes were established, residents of Mexico really began to believe that their city would be the heart of the world. And I think this image illustrates in one way how China and its exports of textiles and spices and porcelains really occupied a central public space in the lives of the residents. The Spanish in Mexico were the first to import porcelain onto the continent. Introduced in Europe in the 14th century, Chinese porcelains were seen as objects of great rarity and luxury. By the early 16th century, when Portugal had established trade routes to the Far East and began trading with Asia, Chinese potters began to produce objects specifically for the West, and porcelains began to arrive in some quantity in New Spain. The journey of porcelain began in Zhengzhou, China, where most of the world's porcelain was made, then onto a port in southern China, and from there to Manila, where Chinese merchants would sell their wares to Mexican merchants, and then who in turn would send them on to Acapulco, where the wares were distributed in various parts of the colony, such as Mexico City, where Asian goods were sold in the central marketplace, the Perron, which we just looked at in the previous slide, and to Puebla, where local potters drew inspiration from these Chinese porcelains, as well as other artistic traditions that would eventually lead to a new style of ceramics known as Talavera Poblana. Initially, it was the blue and white wares that had enormous appeal for the residents of New Spain, and they could be seen everywhere, from churches to convents to elegant urban townhomes. These objects really provided an opportunity for the two cultures to learn from one another. The West, the residents in New Spain and the rest of the world acquired these Chinese forms, these objects in Chinese form and decoration to enhance their interiors. And in turn, Asian craftsmen responded by learning to produce objects that satisfied these Western tastes. Porcelain for the colonial Mexican market is closely related and sometimes identical to what was being produced for the other European markets. Soon, New Spain began to follow the taste set by European and Spanish nobility in the commissioning of special services made with the family's coat of arms. So soon you begin to see that the similarities and the effects of taste, where Chinese armorial and proclamation services are being produced, and they appear in the homes of colonial nobility, as well as they can be seen in public institutions. In 1555, upon the accession of Philip II to the Spanish throne, it became tradition to celebrate by the organization of proclamation parties, which were organized by religious institutions in every city of the Spanish Empire, and to order special medals for distribution that could commemorate the event. In 1788, King Charles IV, a son of Charles III and Maria Amalia of Saxony, ascended to the Spanish throne. On this occasion, a number of institutions, city governments, universities, guilds, commissioned medals, each decorated with one side with a portrait bust, as seen here, of the new king. On the reverse were the arms or insignia of the commissioning institution. Most were designed by the famed Spanish engraver Geronimo Antonio Gil. Geronimo Antonio Gil trained in painting and engraving in Madrid, but he soon stood out as a medalist and engraver of plates, especially of ancient coins and monuments. Gil arrived in Mexico City in 1778 to take charge of the Royal Mint, and was entrusted with establishing a school of engraving there. His efforts in artistic tradition eventually resulted in the founding of the Academy of San Carlos, which was formally established in 1785, where he would remain director until his death in 1798. Gil is credited with introducing the neoclassical style to Mexico. Some commemoration medals that bear Gil's signature found their way to China around 1792 to be copied. Chinese export services were based on 7 of these medals, each faithfully rendering the details of the original. One example of these medals produced on porcelain was commissioned by the Royal Court of Mining. Mining became regulated in the 16th century as it was a very important activity in Mexico. Silver was what greased the wheels of this global trade. The Spanish crown decided that the whole production of this metal had to be sent to Mexico City to the mint for coinage purposes. The Court of Mining was established in 1777 to supervise all mining activity. Duties and functions were specified in a new code of 1783. In 1790, it took over the additional responsibility as acting as a court of appeals in all mining disputes. Here we're looking at a comparative of the reverse side of the medal as executed by Gil, and a close-up of the detail of the platter in which the decoration features in the center. The reverse of this medal shows the shield surmounted by a royal crown with the royal coat of arms of Spain, encircled by the orders of the Golden Fleece and of Charles III, who founded the company in 1776. Behind the shield sits the pillars of Hercules, 2 globes, as well as several mining attributes. The inscription has been translated to read, "The Royal Court of Mining of New Spain expresses its fidelity with this monument executed in Mexico in 1789. The corresponding image was reproduced in porcelain and is a faithful rendering of the medal. The decision to commission a Chinese export service with the decorated with the insignia of the Royal Court of Mines, I think is really indicative of the important role in which the mining court played within the Spanish Empire, especially in its relation to the mining of silver. By 1800, New Spain's silver production represented almost 2/3 of the world's output, and Mexico would remain the main producer of silver into the 20th century. This plate depicts the medal showing the arms of the city of Puebla de los Angeles, modern-day Puebla, Mexico. The Spanish conquistador, Hernán Cortés, occupied the Puebla region in 1519, killing most of the indigenous population and precipitating the fall of the Aztec Empire. In 1524, the Spanish crown gave grants to the conquistadors, which authorized them to force area natives into servitude. As a result, the indigenous people were put to work in agriculture and mining for the benefit of Spain. Throughout this period, the Spaniards raised many temples and replaced them with churches. However, rather than modernizing the city, they just chose to build it in another location, which was about 9 miles to the east, making the new city of Puebla the first Spanish-built city in 1531, not founded on the ruins of a conquered settlement. Puebla was the second most important city after Mexico City, and it's where the famous Talavera Poblana is manufactured. The reverse of this medal and the central medallion on the porcelain bear the coat of arms of the city of Los Angeles, granted by Charles V in 1538. A crown sits atop a central shield, which depicts a 5-tower cathedral being held up by 2 angels. Julian Garces, founder of the city, had a dream which led him to the site on which Puebla currently stands. Also, the bells of the cathedral could not be lifted to the top of the tower until 2 angels came to help. 25 proclamation medals were ordered by different cities and institutions to commemorate the accession of Charles IV, but only 7 are known to have been reproduced for Chinese export porcelain, possibly because the reproduction of all 25 would have been an expensive endeavor. It's likely that the medals intended to be copied were sent to China straight from the Mexico City Mint. Commissioning of porcelain services by municipal and city institutions illustrates the important role New Spain played in global trade, as well as the importance of these institutions in support of the Spanish crown. Colonial Mexico's cosmopolitanism was directly related to its central position within this network of goods and resources, and provided for the vibrant and distinct porcelain market that thrived in the Spanish Americas. Thank you for joining me today. We hope to see you at Rienzi.